Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining myself and my wonderful guest, Bob Smith from 60 Skills today. We've got a fantastic conversation on the topic of Egregores. And I'm sure that with the 20 different pronunciations of that word, we will be able to provide everyone with a way to access it so that we can get that word out there a bit more. And yeah, Bob, man, one of my absolute favorite content creators on the topics of Hermetics, Kabbalah, yogic meditation, the Barden work, Esoterica in general. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
I'm happy to be here, and I'm always happy to share with folks. It's keep in mind that I consider myself an adept. Okay, I'm a man with training, a lot of experience, all that kind of thing. But I try to avoid the term master because I found a nasty tendency amongst people that when they start calling themselves the master, right, their learning stops. They're now expected to know everything. So obviously, whatever toolkit they have is everything. So they don't start learning anything else. I've been really lucky in the course of my esoteric adventures that I met people who were really good at what they did. I mean, just in some cases bordering on the supernatural, to be completely honest with you. So that always acted as a kind of ego check for me because, listen, all things being equal, if someone's been doing something for 15 or 20 years, you're never going to catch them on a one-to-one basis, right? They're always going to be better to some degree than I am. And I have tried and frequently failed to maintain that attitude to allow my own journey, quite frankly, to keep going. And I published all this material and do the videos and all that other kind of thing because, quite frankly, what took me 30 years to figure out should have taken 4 or 5. But either the methodology wasn't well understood or people weren't willing to share or what have you. So something that should have been rather pragmatic turned into a kind of quest for fire scenario. So there you go.
Yeah, and just on that word, language is more powerful, I think, than people realize. And when it comes to that word master, so I have a bit of a scholarship in the topic of Reiki,
Mm.
and I found because there's people who will attend a weekend workshop and they're a master, and I have a certificate that says I'm a master, and I
Right.
found a website that would let me pay $47 to download a certificate that said I'm a master, and
Sure.
it's like that word. Um, you're right. It can almost put a cap on your progress in a sense too. And just as a quick aside, I actually found out the origin of that word in the system of Reiki when the chap came from the Japan to Hawaii to meet. There's a bit of a backstory there, but basically, on the manifest, he was listed as a headmaster of a school, or the Japanese term for that, and that was translated to the word master. And that's apparently how it got introduced. It was never actually meant as master because it was, they were teachers essentially. But
Sure.
you know, if you can get something that allows you to be called a master, some people just gravitate towards that, and unfortunately, it's unhelpful because it tends to dilute the currency, which I've personally found in the system of Reiki in a lot of cases. Is that you know these are cultivation practices, and this leads into the topic of our convo, which is egregores,
Mm.
and that they are essentially and please correct me where I'm wrong here, but they are the outcome, I guess, of a group effort in a lot of cases, and that outcome will be measured by the quality and the quantity of that group, and over time as well. And so, Bob, in a sentence, or best as you can in a phrase, what is an egregore?
Okay. Best I can tell, an egregore is an intelligent, energetically powered construct that is formed anytime 2 or more people work on something. So egregores are all around us. Some are esoteric, but a lot of them aren't. A lot of them are very practical. And this is the reason why con men over time can't maintain the facade of pretending to be a police officer or a lawyer or a doctor or any one of these things that takes a lot of training and education and experience to be part of that group, because something's off. No matter how many books they read, no matter how many YouTube videos they watch, if they're not immersed into that thing, the energetic signature they have with them is different than the people in that group. And even though most people don't have much active energetic sensitivity, boy, do they have it passively. People react to the energy or the vibration that a person brings into a room. And if you're professing to be part of a profession and you don't have that, on some level, they're going to know. And that's an interesting thing. Keeping in mind, egregores exist for everything. Coca-Cola has one. Insurance companies have them. Again, anytime you get two or more people working together on something, you're going to create an egregore around that. Now, how magical that is and what its applications are obviously vary greatly depending upon what you're talking about. But yeah, man, that's kind of the basis of my understanding of it.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that is a very clear sort of understanding, I think, to the, there's a passage in the Bible, when two or more of you come together in my name, and I was like, I reflected on that because I think Mark Rasmus mentioned that too. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. I know that individuals can generate things as well. That's in the Barton material. But obviously, in my own experience working in groups, you have this thing which is greater than the sum of its parts, essentially. But I just wanted to touch on this topic too. So classifications of egregores.
Sure.
So I've got a short list here. Bless the AI for doing the donkey work, and
Sure.
that is national identities, corporate, spiritual traditions, myths. I guess there can be thought forms sort of centered around that. Beings or entities, activated thought forms. Would you add or comment on that at all?
Sure. Religions.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Really big in that regard. I mean, for example, Christianity. Okay. The power of the Latin Mass. The Latin Mass is this incredibly potent magical vehicle, but there's a catch. You can only access that and work with it actively if you're ordained a priest in an apostolic line of succession. Otherwise, someone like me, who's great at working with energy, got lots of meditative skills, a little clairvoyance, a little clairaudience, blah, blah, blah. I can see it, I can feel it, but I can't actively work with it. I'd have to be declared a priest. And that's the thing about a lot of egregores, is unless you have certain initiations or empowerments or trainings, or essentially you're given the secret handshake, you can't actually access it. Now, that's not true of everything, but it's certainly true of the bigger, older forms. So I have one student right now, for example, who's going through the process of being ordained a Shingon priest. Very interested in it, very devout, awesome, good fit for him. Shingon has roughly 300 rituals that are known, anyway, in the system. By the time he's fully ordained, he'll be able to interact with those and learn them and learn how to use them. But here's the funny part. He probably won't be able to tell me how it works, or even give me many details regarding what the rituals are, because the egregore doesn't allow that to happen. So, like a lot of these rites of secrecy you see in Esoterica, it's really an egregoric effect. The egregore says this is part of the secrecy, is part of the system, so you can't share. It's, in terms of my own coursework and some of the materials I've published, it's very rare for an individual to have an ability at these things and to be able to write them down and openly discuss how to do them. Even in the last 50 years, there have really only been two other major seminal works issued. Glenn Morris from Path Notes of an American Ninja Master fame described how to do the macrocosmic orbits and what happened as a result of doing it. This was quote unquote sacred knowledge for a very long time before that, and a lot of people were really upset with him. John Michael Greer, likewise, when he wrote his book, Circles of Power, where he took all of that old Golden Dawn stuff, wrote it down in modern English, said lockstep, this is how you do it. This is the theory behind it, which he expanded upon in Paths of Wisdom, by the way, both which are fantastic books. The harassment was so bad, he actually had to move.
Wow.
Yeah, people were really upset. In my own experiences, there was the short-lived 60 Skills app, which I'm trying to reconstitute these days. It was funny. I was, on location filming, right? I'm there. I've got a film crew. I've got a script. Everything's panned out. And several times I'd be standing there and I couldn't speak because the egregore behind this didn't really want this stuff to be out there. So it's a rare individual who is both a practitioner and who can put pen to paper. And when you're looking at my favorite pastime, Kabbalah, right? That little book that I wrote on initial experiences with the Kabbalah is only the third or fourth book written on the topic of how to do it and what happened in about 400 years. Mm-hmm. Why? The technology is simple: color, sound, sensation, key into a certain thing, repeat. But that was really hard to do. In fact, the book had already been written, copy proofed, had a cover for 4 years before it got published, because I was in the Czech Republic talking to Jake, who some of us here know, and he just started publishing it for me because I literally couldn't publish it. I couldn't go in myself to Amazon Kindle and put it online. It had been done for 4 years. I mean, these are crazy effects you get from egregores, and depending upon the strength of the egregore and how it's set up and the person's individual constitution, sometimes we can overcome these things, and sometimes, man, it's just a matter of picking your poison.
Wow, that's really powerful what you just said there, because I can relate to that. And I'd like to think I can push through some certain sort of blockages, but it's like, I have to say that I won't go into specifics, but I will say there's been a couple of things in the last sort of decade since I started sort of exploring meditation, where it's like, no, but there's no logic to this. Why can't I just, and it's like, no, and it's like, but I'm very peaceful and still about it. I'm not angry about it. It's like, oh no, this is the way it should be. I just shouldn't do this one thing or something, or it's just, it's a strange thing.
And that's the insidious part about egregores. So I'll give you an example that I've used in a couple of videos, but it's a really good one in case people haven't seen it. I studied the Black School of St. Cyprian under Jason Miller for about a year. And I don't anymore, and I'll explain why. Did all the prayers, did all the rituals, made all the, all the offerings, did all the different tools, got it. Worked really well. About halfway into this process, I developed an overwhelming desire to be ordained a priest in an apostolic line of succession. Catholicism is the most common example of this, but there are others that can be done in a year or two. And it seemed completely organic. It seemed to be something that I really wanted to do. Okay. Fast forward towards the end of the year that I spent doing this, I was in that state between dreaming and waking, where you're just lying in bed and your subtle senses are really wide open. In there, St. Cyprian manipulating my Akashic connection above my head at the crown. And I'm like, wait a second.
Dude, what?
I learned how to do this the hard way through internal development. In my opinion, nothing gets to monkey with that. So came out of it, broke with the school, despite agreements that I'd made with the school. Had pounding headaches for a couple weeks afterwards. It was really kind of rough. But here's the interesting part. That desire to become a priest evaporated immediately. That wasn't me. But as someone associated with an egregore, I couldn't tell the difference. It felt completely natural. And this led to a greater exploration of how egregores work and how we get influenced and so on and so forth. And that's the thing about egregores. They're not good or bad as long as your goals and the goal of the egregore are in alignment. So if you want to be a doctor, of course, get the medicine Buddha empowerment, give all the offerings, do the prayers, over a period of time, you'll have a better connection with the medicine Buddha. He'll begin to inform your medical practice. Awesome. On the other hand, if you're hooked up with something like the Lemegeton or the Goetia spirits or the Lesser Key of Solomon, and it starts complicating your life, maybe you shouldn't be doing that. And that's where the trouble comes in, is when people get connected to things that are either inherently negative in nature or create problems for them regarding what they're trying to do in life. But when you're under the influence of the Egregore, yeah, man, it all seems natural. It's only once you break free of that you go, oh, okay, that doesn't make any sense. And, one other example of this that I can give shortly here, because we don't have all day, is I went to medical school for traditional Chinese medicine. It took me 5 years to get the degree. While I enjoy research, I'm not a good retail practitioner. I don't enjoy treating patients. But I was so immersed into that during a 5-year school period with thousands of clinical hours and hundreds of patients and all the rest of this. I couldn't see that it was the egregore of that thing, being a TCM doctor, that was holding me there, when in reality, I was not a good fit as a practitioner for the people who actually needed help. And so, when I surrendered my license in TCM, that was kind of tough, because you got a better part of a decade of work in here. And I've been doing that kind of work for over 20 years on a part-time basis from Chinese medicine that I had learned via the martial arts. But when I left that, right, my behavior changed. The way I carried my body changed. My language even changed a little bit. It was that big a break. And that's the nature of egregores. You get a lot out of them, but it comes at a cost of your free will. And that's the tricky part.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that. And I appreciate you sharing your experiences on this too. I think this is where people who are in Esoterica, who maybe, get involved with things, then, they start experiencing change and transformation, and they're not sure why. And I think too, there's that whole thing about, when you get involved in something, there's a sort of a warming up period where you don't know you're being lowered into the soup. And the next thing,
Right.
you don't even realize that you're in the soup.
Right.
And then when you get abruptly taken out of the soup, it's like you've got to readjust, and it's like it's a very it can be quite a startling thing. This is real stuff. I mean, and so this leads to my next question on the nature of the beast, as I put it here. So we've kind of brushed across the first part of the question about how egregores form, but what are their primary needs to survive? Is that a thing, or do they carry on regardless of participation of people?
Here's a story I got told about the formation of the original British practitioners of the Golden Dawn. They were originally a bunch of kind of half-trained meditators and yogic practitioners who were basically doing mental wandering as tourism. And one day in a group working, they ran into what is the Golden Dawn egregore or system, and basically got completely downloaded into them all at once. So this explains some of their kind of wacky behavior, right? Because a lot of these guys were a little crazy, which can happen when you have a massive rush of esoteric energy and information enter your body. And that's something that isn't very well understood. These things, because they exist on the astral at a minimum, and the astral being a timeless place, can just hang out there for really long periods of time. Now, when they get brought back into the physical world through new adepts or whatever, the system can change a little bit. But I'll give you an example of this. I was on site in Turkey doing some filming with one of my senior students. This was during COVID, so nobody was around. And we were in rural Turkey, just in the middle of nowhere. Well, we found a archaeological site that had been a temple to Leto, who was a kind of earth goddess fertility figure in the area. Okay. So we let ourselves in. Nobody was there. We went right into the old temple area, sat down, and went into meditation. Contact with the entity was immediate. Boom. Again, this was one of their major worship sites. But nobody had worshipped this entity since the early years of Christianity. So if nobody had worked with this thing since, 1 or 200 AD in central Anatolia, it was still there. And we had some interesting experiences based off that, nothing hostile or anything like that. But I could see how, if you had somebody who had some basic mental wondering skills, maybe a little natural clairvoyance, a little natural clairaudience, wasn't particularly well grounded, and maybe had done some drugs or was under duress, and they wandered into this place, they would create a new religion around what was essentially Leto, given enough time. Because the entity is potent, has a lot of ability, and this particular entity just wanted to be worshipped. Because nobody fed it, basically, in 1800 years. So these things, once they're charged up, and they've either created an entity or attracted an entity to it, and it's not entirely clear how that works, they can hang out for a real long time, even when no active practitioners of that exist. And this can get you into some interesting cul-de-sacs, because take something like the Egyptian pantheon, right? Super potent, people have interactions with us all the time. You can even go to some of the places in Egypt that still exist where the esoteric machinery that was in place that empowered these things is still there. But it's not complete. And you don't have all the initiation rituals. So you can go there, you can encounter the entity, you can have these really potent experiences with the entity, but leveraging everything that an ancient Egyptian could have, you can't, because there's no one to get the initiation from. And a lot of the magical machinery they built doesn't exist in its complete form anymore either. So, like I said, egregores can exist for very long periods of time without any active worship or engagement. And then, under the right set of circumstances, just come roaring back.
It's very interesting that, there's a movie with Sam Neill in it called Merlin from the 80s. And at the end of the movie, they turn away from Queen Mab to forget her, so that the old goddess religion just sort of fades off into the distance.
Right.
And I was wondering about that as an allegorical truth in a sense. But I can imagine that if these things have had these things, maybe not the nicest way of referring to them, but
whatever they are.
Yeah, that's right. They have some real traction and staying power. So fantastic. Now we also brushed on gated access to egregores via ritual purposes like the Catholicism. Now here's one. Can they become self-aware or develop a self-preservation instinct?
From what I've gathered, yes. I believe it was Jason Miller, or maybe it was Greer. I don't remember anymore. Probably Miller. Talked about how the entities themselves change over time. So let's use a good, bad example. Somebody decides they want to work with Lucifer. Not generally a good idea, but okay, they want to do that. The Lucifer of the 14th century is a very different entity than the Lucifer of the 21st century. That entity has developed over time. Now, how much of this is a matter of that entity's individual actions? Or how much of this is a matter of thousands of people trying to work with that entity over 1,000 years, changing what that entity is to one degree or another? So a very common thing that we run into in spirit magic is if you invoke an entity at the non-dual level, frequently they're very clean. There's very little baggage. The interactions are very direct and generally directed towards your higher nature. Great. By the time you bring that entity down into the Akashic, into the mental, into the astral, and into the vital, you can wind up with something on the surface that's radically different and really grungy and has a lot of negative baggage associated with it. Why? Because that egregore buildup happens on the astral. So the more physical or the more dual something gets, the more it absorbs that cultural kind of baggage and the association that people have with it, that we're working with it. So this is also why some groups say, there are very few spirits, but many masks. Because depending upon how that spirit's been manifested, you're going to get a different form of it. There was a series by Gaiman on the old gods. Which one?
American Gods?
American Gods, right. Where he talks about how, there's the there's the European Jesus, there's the Latin Jesus, there's the African Jesus. It's all Jesus, but they're different representations of that entity.
Yeah, right.
And on a practical basis, they're different entities. So if you're working with something like a Mesoamerican entity, a region where human sacrifice was performed on an industrial scale, okay, at a non-dual level, probably okay. On an astral or etheric or vital level, man, you're going to be dealing with some weird stuff. And so that's where these entities are not static. They develop over time. And depending upon how you engage with them, it can get a little tricky. So let's go back to Golden Dawn, right? Everyone I've talked to and historical research seems to indicate the original Golden Dawn entity, Egregore, was largely one from the late medieval period. So if you were a late 19th century British nobleman and you engaged with this and it started to impact your behavior, all right, you're a little eccentric, right? A little weird, but that can probably be managed. 21st century person from New York City, those changes to your behavior may work for you or might not. It just depends. And so that's where the egregores tend to take a life of their own on. They can survive for a very long period of time. They can go completely dormant, and they can change. If you're familiar with Dr. Stephen Skinner, he wrote a bunch of books on evocation and all kinds of stuff. Amazing individual. Yeah. He said, based off research that he did, that the names of the entities in the Lemegeton basically hadn't changed since Greek antiquity. Which means these entities are really old, but also have a lot of buildup around them. The buildup may or may not be helpful depending upon what you're doing. I mean, one of the entities in that list that I ran into could tell you where to find the jewels for grave robbing. Okay. Grave robbing was a big business a couple hundred years ago, right? No cell phones, middle of the night, Grave robbing today? How useful is that really? Trying to steal grandma's, $300 gold ring. So again, utility can also have a lot to do with how these things survive and how they adapt. And American Gods, address that theme, within the context of both the book and the TV show. And that's why I always tell people, listen, you're going to get involved with spirit magic. Okay. If you don't have your own Akasha to dissolve connections with things so you can get away with it and make it leave, and you don't have your own non-dual light, so you're at least nominally tracking upon your proper path of development, kind of giving you that double check or gut check going, hey man, this is a good idea. Now you're down to using willpower. And these things don't sleep, and they can heckle you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They will eventually win that fight if you don't have some other way of making them leave. And even with that, okay, I had a friend who was running a business, had a problem with people not paying him. He was owed a lot of money. I think it was in excess of 100,000 US dollars, and he wasn't going to get any of it back. So he gave me a list of 20 or so people who owed him the most money. Okay. I went in, did something I don't normally do, which is I accessed the Lemegeton, because after talking to people, they were like, yeah, for debt collection, there's a couple entities you want to use. This one's a little rougher. This one's a little nicer. I chose the nicer one of the bunch. Okay. 2 weeks later, he'd gotten $40,000 back. Hey, I'm working down the list. Fine. Go to engage this one individual. And turns out they like to wear a gypsy amulet. So the entity rebounded on me. That was unpleasant, but given my skills, I was able to make that go away. That was the only time I ever used, as I like to call it, demonic powered debt collection. In other words, they'll either pay or they'll pay. And even now, several years later, despite a number of banishings and releasing sessions, I can still feel that entity in the periphery of my mental field. Right? Now, that's not an entity that I worked with for years. This was based off of, maybe a dozen, 20 workings over the course of a month or two. So, kind of like having dangerous friends, right? Or family members in the mafia. Okay. You can establish distance between yourself and those individuals, right? But they can still make contact with you whether you want it or not. And so this is where concepts of complete immunity, or I'm just going to release on it, or I'm just going to banish and it's done. Yeah, I mean, that'll definitely take the edge off. And you'll certainly be aware when something tries to, influence you. But hey, man, these are semi-permanent connections. And so what I'm just trying to tell people is, when it comes to spirit magic, be very careful what you choose to engage with in dealing with the negative or more spicy entities out there. Generally doesn't work to your advantage. As one of my teachers once said, angels give you what you need, demons give you what you want. So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you for that. Yeah.
So, fair enough.
Yeah. I think there's obviously a real allure and towards this kind of work in general. It's such a broad field, and you've made some great videos on breaking down the rough categories, I guess, or the main categories of these sorts of practices, and obviously one of them being spirit magic, which is very common out there. People will go to the Golden Dawn now. Just on an aside, did you say that the Golden Dawn system existed before they were connected with it? Isn't that interesting?
Well, more than that, if you give me a second, I'll grab a book that people here can buy.
Yeah, do it. Thank you.
Put on my spectacles here because I'm old, fat, and blind. But
it's glorious, brother. It's glorious.
So, all right. You can buy this book called The Magus by Barrett. And what this is it's kind of a compendium of a bunch of things that were in Western esoterica, dating from, I want to say, the period of the Renaissance onward. Historians out there will yell at me because I'm sure I'm getting that wrong. But if you read through this, you're going to see a lot of commonalities with the Golden Dawn material. Now, not as refined, not as well put together, not as user-friendly, right? But you can see how something was there. These poor individuals or fools or whatever they were just managed to break through in a way that gave them direct access to something. And this is something else I'm going to warn people about, because there are people out here who are dumb enough to do this. So I'll just go ahead and get it out of the way with right now. There are some rare individuals out there who can just walk up to you and turn certain abilities on. Here's the problem with that. If your body, in your mind, in your psyche, in your astral body, and all the rest of that isn't prepared for this, it tends to make people completely insane. So let's go back to Christ and the apostles. Well, when asked about their various abilities, the apostles said these were gifts that Christ gave unto us. Okay. John the Baptist, out of all the apostles, was probably the only one other than Christ himself who had formal yogic training. John the Baptist was the only one who died of old age. You got to remember, back in the day, to get martyred, you really had to go the extra mile. I mean, even the Romans were going to give people a lot of chances to, walk that back, right? Because even they understood martyrs create problems. But you can't have martyrs, people who become martyrs, running around acting like crazy people all the time, or that creates problems too. So even with the Romans or the church later on in the Inquisition, straight up killing somebody or executing somebody for religious activity was relatively rare. I mean, I think during the entire 400 plus year period of the Inquisition, the church officially executed less than 2,500 people. Now, that's not to say some village tribunal somewhere didn't, string up some old lady for putting herbs together to help out someone's young kid with a fever. But in general, these big organizations tried to avoid doing that. Well, if you're getting the message from the organization and you don't feel like dying, you're going to take actions to make sure that you don't wind up getting, strapped to a wooden pole and set on fire. So someone who's willing to go that distance is a little, little off balance. And if you have these esoteric abilities just suddenly turned on in you, it's pretty destabilizing. And a lot of people don't make it back from that. Drug use can sometimes cause it. Near-death experiences can sometimes cause it. But generally, what I've found is people who were subject to rituals at the hands of an advanced practitioner who weren't prepared usually get the worst of it. And if you spend a lot of time in China, you can meet people who will talk about this kind of thing. I found the Chinese to be remarkably pragmatic about this kind of business, even if they didn't really want to discuss it with a foreigner, or even if they didn't really understand per se how a lot of it really worked.
Well, I can imagine, in countries where they have I only have my frame of reference of living here in the country that I was born. I've only done a minimal amount of travel. And so,
Right.
there's a cultural context in other places that I cannot hope to ever understand, no matter how much I've studied and read and talked to people on that,
Right.
And I can imagine that, in some countries, this is just, seeing things in the sky, or, or seeing magnificent miracles and things like that. Yeah, that was Tuesday, bro. Or that's just a day of the week. That's just every other thing, if you don't have those experiences, you tend to be in the minority because there's a general acceptance for it, maybe, or it's just more commonplace. It's much more conservative.
A common thing I've run into, and this goes back to Egregores a little bit,
Yeah.
so if it gets boring, just cut me off, is that a lot of these more traditional societies have an understanding of things like supernatural phenomenon, energy, meditation, yogic, chi, whatever. But it's the kind of understanding that an American has of the wild, wild West. Yes, that was an historical period in American history. Yes, there were cowboys and there wasn't much law enforcement, and guys fought it out at high noon in the middle of the street, with black powder pistols. But it's not something that they were ever a part of, not something they really understand. So on the one hand, it makes things easier because they don't have this mental block to the idea that a subtle world exists. Go team. But it comes at the expense of, when these things are allowed to manifest, they happen in a very specific social cultural context. So, guy like me, okay? I grew up in South Texas, very agnostic, non-religious family. So when I started having all these weird meditative experiences as a young man, I didn't really know where to go with any of this stuff. Didn't make any sense to me. It wasn't part of my worldview. I didn't know anybody in my family. Led to this 30-year-long quest. Okay. Along the way, I was an officer in my nation's military. I deployed abroad during the War on Terror, did a bunch of interesting work building other countries, became a TCM practitioner, so on and so forth. I got to do all these amazing things. If I'd been in a place like Thailand and I started having these experiences, a shaman, a cousin, an uncle, a local monk would have found me. They would have taken me off to the monastery, and I would have been a monk. That would have been my life. I wouldn't have been able to do anything else, because in that society, that's what happens. So Yeah, some Westerners have this weird cultural infatuation with other things. And, they like to think about, oh, how great it would have been if I'd been born in Tibet or, wherever, right? Well, having spoken to a lot of these more traditional practitioners from those parts of the world, the lives of the people who get involved with this business are very rough and very narrowly focused, often in ways that, as a Western person who grew up with some degree of affluence, as most of the West has, would just be unthinkable. I mean, one of my teacher's stories about what he had to go through to learn troll core as an ethnic Tibetan living in Tibet were just crazy, just completely insane. And any normal person would have given up. But he was infatuated with it, so he eventually learned it. So those are things to keep in mind. Cultural context with all this stuff is really important. But it also directly flavors what you can engage with. Because here's a strange thing. Belief doesn't impact reality that much, but belief impacts our ability to engage with reality. Anybody who's ever been in a gunfight for the first time with a group of people will tell you there will be that guy, first time he's been in one, who's just standing there like a bump on a log in a fugue state. Bullets are flying. He's just like, because he can't believe someone's actually trying to kill him. This is typically after months, if not years, of military training. Okay. So one of the other guys is more experienced, tackles the guy. And after 2 or 3 encounters, he gets over it and everything's fine, assuming he doesn't die in the get-go. But literally, that's other people are trying to kill you. You've been trained to deal with this. And the guy's mind still can't grab a hold of the concept that somebody's actually trying to kill him and he needs to do something about it. So with more subtle phenomena like energy, which modern Western people don't have as part of their reality construct. Modern Western people believe in materiality, in mind, and if they're religious, okay, God. Well, extrapolated to what we do in Hermetics, vital, astral, mental, akashic, non-dual light, divine providence. Well, that's only 3 of the 5. You're leaving out the astral, energy, sensation, perception, and you're leaving out akasha. Now, a really smart guy who's really focused can get over that. But this is one of the reasons why psychology is so screwed up in Western circles. They're trying to address everything as mind if it's not physical. Well, there's that whole other layer of reality in there that they're missing. So, of course, their treatment protocols don't work very well. Things are kind of weird. Again, a big part of addiction, for example, is sensation. Oh, I got to have whatever.
Yeah, totally.
Well, if you don't have a technology for addressing sensation, now you're going to have to rely upon sheer force of will to get over it. And that's a game that most people lose. I mean, listen, obesity and smoking, right? Okay. They should be the easiest thing in the world to get over. Don't eat. Don't smoke. You're not having to actively do anything. You're just having to not do something that's bad for you. And mentally, you recognize it's bad for you. But that astral level sensation of, oh, I want more, or this is a habit, or this is a routine, or this is what I was taught to do, mentally should be easy to get over. But in practical terms, really hard. Really hard. Most people, who lose 100 kilos of weight or give up a drug addiction, they get to do that once in life. And that's like a major effort for them. And they're lucky if they can keep it up forever. Again, mentally, should be the easiest thing in the world. Just don't do this. But practically, that's really hard, man. And getting back to the Egregores thing, because they exist astrally, there's a lot of energy, a lot of sensation, a lot of emotion, a lot of this kind of thing associated with it that can radically change someone's behavior. and also makes it really hard to walk away.
Man, you've just hit some stuff there that's absolutely perfect for our next couple of questions here, because
Sure.
when it comes to, I don't think people realize, like I've got a cousin who was in marketing for 3 years, and essentially I sort of had a chat with him,
Yeah.
and I said, so bro, pretty much your job is to get people to make purchasing decisions that they would not otherwise likely make. And he's like, well, yeah, I guess so. And I said, yeah. And, and so what sort of tactics do you use? I mean, I look at the fast food joints and they're all primary colors. They keep you on the edge. You can't, but if you go to the local restaurant, they're using nice soft pastels. You can sit down there. They want you to get comfy and that they're not trying to push you out the door, sort of thing. But then there's like, there's there's feelings that accompany this. And it's like, and there's, when we're talking about, say, psychology that might deal with emotional issues, but it's almost like the astral body has got sort of, at a very gross sort of rough way, you've got emotions and sensations, and they're kind of sides of the same coin, maybe. I don't know, like I'd love to hear a bit of that, in the sense of like, how these things are essentially leveraged to sort of get people to engage them, from a corporate level.
Now, I can't name names, but unfortunately, I'm having to be that guy right now. But what I can tell you is Stavish's book Egregores is thought of very highly in political marketing circles. Very, very highly. Because here's the thing, a branding guy, when you introduce him to the concept of an egregore, he's going to get that. He's like, oh yeah, this is what I do all day long. Again, ultimately, human beings have free will. Okay. All I'm getting at is that we have a lot less free will in application than we do in theory. Because, listen, emotion, sensation, desire, all of that astral level stuff, and pardon my language if this is a family show, will make you its bitch in record time.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, anyone here who's ever experienced true hunger can tell you just how horrible that is, just how absolutely mind-bending terrible it is, and how that will haunt you for the rest of your life. Now, most people, particularly in the West, have never actually experienced real hunger. But for those of us who have, let me tell you, man, that's no joke. Now, you can overcome that, right? And there are people who fast for 30, 40 days sometimes. In fact, the longest supervised fast in history was a gentleman who was fasted for over a year. Now, he was exceptionally obese when he started, and when he ended, he was 185 pounds. So I'm guessing that's what, about 83 kilos. But I think he started out at something like 200. So again, these are things that can be overcome through effort, willpower, etc. As a magician, just hokey as the term is what I am, we are given some tools that make this easier. But I'm under no illusion that I'm getting worked by things all the time. Just having access to these tools will make you aware, gives you a chance to be aware of it, and then a chance to do something about it, even if doing something about it is often not worth the effort. And I say that in as kind of a warning to some of my friends and students out there, potential students, other practitioners. There's a huge disconnect in esoterica. There's a huge bottleneck. The theory of going from physical to astral to mental to akashic to non-dual works perfectly fine. The theory on the way back down from non-dual or Godhead to akasha to mental to astral works full-time. How many people do you know can levitate this pen using the power of their mind? I don't know anybody. How many people can set a sheet of paper on fire upon command using energy that they developed meditatively? I don't know a single one. there's a disconnect in getting from the astral to the vital in terms of the technology we have access to. Now, there are lots of stories, lots of anecdotal evidence that seem to indicate that it is a thing that can be done. Okay. But it doesn't seem to happen very often. And when it does happen, it mostly seems to be an accident or spontaneous. And the number of people out there who can do these things actively upon demand seem to be preciously small. That's how willpower works in the real world. Yep, you got it. But most people are only going to be able to make a couple of changes during the course of their lifetime, even if they have access to this kind of technology that we all kind of take for granted here. Give you a bit more better odds, maybe do it one or two more times. But I'm here to tell you, man, willpower is a rare commodity. Let me rephrase that. The ability to fundamentally change who and what we are appears to be a very rare commodity in practice, if not in theory.
And you know, and this is why we have such a plethora of industries centered around transformational sort of things, because maybe old technologies we've become immune to some of them, perhaps, or you know, like they're you know, it's like a shop merchandiser. You have to keep changing it, otherwise it doesn't have the potency and the allure and the effect. Because I think that you know, you know, a hypnotherapist friend of mine, he gets sent people from you know, the wife might send the husband to give up smoking, but he's not on board with it for whatever reason.
Sure.
So, yeah, there's a lot of variables involved here, and but yeah, you know, back to this topic of, you know, influences and free will and how that interconnects with egregores. You know, this is interesting for me. I'm just going to jump it down the list a little bit here, and I'm just going to say that, you know, using the case study of, say, Reiki, and that it's fairly recent, and that it was only really there's a lot of context that I won't go into, because it's not doesn't need to go into. But essentially, this guy, he wants to have a universal mind experience, so he goes up this mountain. The priest tells him to, well, if you want, the only way I can think of is near-death experience. So basically fast for 21 days under a waterfall. And there's not a lot of people who know the story recognize the tech underlying these sort of practices and that. And he goes up there and he has a universal mind experience, comes down the hill, bangs his foot, rips his toenail off, heals it somehow faster. He was already doing healing. He comes down, and does some more healing, and then he starts trying to heal people in the street, and then they just go back to doing the same old shit. And he's like, this is just actually going nowhere. So he became a teacher, and then he had students, and the technology developed, and then it became, later on down the track, somebody else changed it to the word Reiki, which is just not etymologically correct. It's a
sure.
So, but anyway, where I'm going with this is that regardless of the guy, so to speak, there is this cultural context that sits underneath in Japan. Like, you know, they have Shinto alongside Buddhism, and a lot of those practices inform, you know, and also the Chinese, the mainland type influence as well. Their language system, their kanji, their writing symbol system was imported. You know, they use Chinese medicine and just rebrand it, these types of things, right?
Sure.
So when you join, say, with the Reiki, and you get what's, you know, the attunement, and I'm a teacher, and I've read many different versions of this attunement process. And like you said, you know, some people just don't have the infrastructure to have these kinds of attunements. And that's why a system like Barden's so great, because you start from the chassis up. You know, you build up the body before you put the V8 in it. You know, you know, these are important things.
Sure.
Yeah. And you know, you don't give a kid a flamethrower to play with. And I have to say, when it comes to Reiki, it's obviously a very gentle idea where you're basically just creating stillness in a nice, simple space and that. But it's like, then you start having dreams about Asian chicks for some reason, and you're like, where does this come from? And you know, this is the part for me where I found it to be quite interesting, because I even had people who I know who have somewhat clairvoyance, and they go, oh man, you got a whole bunch of like really hot Asian chicks hanging out in your background and stuff. And I'm like, really? That's interesting. I mean, I've studied a bit of Japanese. I'm not dressed in a kimono and rocking it. I attend to the practice, and I'm grateful. And I've worked for a Japanese company, and I studied Japanese at school, so maybe these things fit into it as well. But I guess where this is leading towards is the question of, you know, can well, there's a bunch of questions, but okay, here's the first one. So, can egregores be more feminine or masculine? Can they take on anthropomorphized personality qualities and these types of things?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So the Black School of St. Cyprian, like I said, I learned from Jason Miller. Yeah, everybody I know who's worked with that has reported encountering a being who looks like Cyprian, the priest, the man. Now, what that being is in actuality, I don't know. I mean, if you look at a lot of medieval text on evocation, they're very specific. They go, command the spirit to appear in a form that is pleasing to the eye.
Yes.
Because, we don't know what these things really are. They're once you begin to develop your ability to work with energy, the idea that these are just segments of our mind just goes out the window. I mean, that's just complete nonsense. But that doesn't change the fact that, I was doing a evocation on my planetary build out with Saturn. Okay. Learning from a Kabbalah spirit of Saturn. Okay. I made the mistake of asking to see what that thing looked like in its natural state. Now, again, as Saturn spirits go, this was not a particularly hostile or unagreeable spirit. I mean, Saturn spirit, right? But, and what I looked at was like a giant crystalline white kind of spider thing, which was really like cross between a starfish and a spider. Really disturbing. Yeah. So yeah, these things can take on any number of forms. They certainly seem to take on personality. The more really when you go from the mental to the astral, that's when that really hits high speed. And they're going to take on anthropological or anthropomorphical, I think is anyway. Yeah. You understand what I'm saying? Characteristics as you get brought down further into the physical. And that's pretty universal. Like Leto was a mother goddess, clearly feminine, no question about that. And can these things change over time? I suspect yes. Apparently the early symbology for Mars, a Mars spirit, was more of a Valkyrie type entity. And that got masculinized over time.
That interesting.
Okay. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's an interesting point of reference.
Yeah, I mean, that's like that whole Venus and men are from Mars and women are from Venus conversation, and like how that affects the general sort of like psychological, social demographic of society, and how we relate to the pantheon of gods. And
sure,
man, that's a big topical by itself. But anyway, I want to hanky you some more for some of this Reiki stuff, because
go, please.
Nobody talks about this stuff. They want to get all fluffy on it, but we're talking hardcore metaphysics here, guys. All right, so so there was a book that was published, a famous book called Essential Reiki, and the Reiki symbols were published for all the public to see, and everyone had access to these symbols. And right. I'm like going, man, you've just given the keys to the temple to any Joe that goes and wants to buy the book. And they're like going, well, these things shouldn't be kept secret and all this, and it's time to make it public. And prior to the symbols being designed, and I've heard a bunch of stories, but the best scholar I can find on the topic, or the scholars say that they came after. They were for basically people who learnt differently, and I have my own understanding of the symbols. I won't go into them, but regardless, the symbols have become sigils,
right?
Because they may have been like a mind tracing pattern or something like that for locating your central point of focus. I'll make a video on that outside of this, but
sure.
The sigils themselves and what people have come to use them for has possibly turned them into something else than what they were otherwise originally intended for. And then over time, maybe they were stewarded in their use as functionality, opportunity for functionality of symbol magic came about, because my understanding is that in Japan, they do have their own magical systems, obviously.
Sure.
I mean, this is not secret or anything, but where am I going with this? So, yeah, I guess what it is like, you've got huge numbers. Like Reiki is probably the most well-known and largely practiced sort of, energy healing practice on the planet that I'm aware of.
Sure.
I've done a bit of research to find out, and I'm like, well, it's also like it's not breaking any news headlines, and there's other reasons for that.
Sure.
Market disrupting sort of tech like this is probably not going to be too favorably looked upon.
Sure.
But it's also like most of the Reiki literature and the people I've met, none of them are daily cultivators or practices, and they're relying on the sigil system. So what I'm saying here is that it's one thing to want to eat the bread, but it's another thing to help bake the bread. And and how does this comes into this concept of like, can egregores be hijacked and infiltrated or diluted through sloppy or incorrect practices? And and there's obviously a reason for protecting access and gating access, maybe like Catholic system. But I'd like to hear what you've got to add about how they can be changed, or consciously or unconsciously, for best intention or not.
The people participating with it over time change it. Okay. If for no other reason than the material that's powering the battery for the egregore gets changed by virtue of other people practicing. This is one of the reasons why a lot of systems have a series of initiations, right? Where you get gradually more immersed into it so you can access it deeper and deeper. Whereas somebody with an entry-level initiation might just be able to kind of touch the surface of it. This is also the reason why some egregores, the well can go dry. I mean, Reiki, for example, I've talked to a few people over the years who've told me that, hey, man, 30 years ago, this was a lot stronger. There seems to be something that got used up or might be missing. I don't know. I'm not a Reiki guy, I can't say, but I've had these conversations with people. So in a lot of systems, particularly some older shamanic ones, like a lot of Taoist stuff, there'll only be one person usually in a generation who's given the keys to the kingdom. And if you meet one of these people, they can do some just supernatural level stuff, but none of their students can. They didn't get the final key to the final door. So in this case, what the systems are doing is they're using the mass of practitioners to power the egregore. So like every time you chant mantras, right? A little bit of that goes to power that mantric battery. Not a lot, a little bit. The spirit or the egregore associated with that comes into you, turns off certain safeties in your body, so you can manifest the desired energy to a much higher level than you would be able to on your own. This is where practices like Barden's Kabbalah, which of course is my favorite practice in the world, gives you an advantage. Because now you can identify those different frequencies and do it on your own without the need to have an entity come do it for you. So on a practical basis, the reason why I teach Kabbalah first is it dramatically changes the nature of the relationship practitioners have with entities. Because now it's not one of dependency. Now the entity goes, oh, all right, I just got to show you how to do it. All right, do this. It doesn't have to come in and do the work. If you don't have that training in Kabbalah, what I call Kabbalah, popularly called Kabbalah from Barden, to identify individual energies and how to replicate them, well, then you're dependent upon that thing coming in every time to make it possible for you to do something. And that further immerses your mind and everything else under its influence, because it has to have that. And the longer you work with the entity, the more deeply it can shut off those mechanisms. So it's the reason why you see a lot of spirit magic practitioners who, as they get older, man, those guys are in rough shape. Because the entities have allowed them to do things that their body wasn't prepared for. So that's one aspect of it. There's the battery aspect of it, which of course we talked about. There's the issue of access being limited frequently intentionally so that battery doesn't get overused. And then, of course, there's the ultimate question of what is this thing behind it? You know, are these entities associated with egregores a creation of the egregore? Or were these things that just glommed onto it when they saw something out there in the astral? Phil, those are questions I can't answer. I just don't know either way. But it's interesting food for thought. That's for sure.
Hey, the fact that we're even having this convo, it's fantastic because there's a lot of people out there that are like going, man, I know I'm doing these practices and I'm having a rough time or I'm playing with things and I'm not sure why. And I recall people talking about, I haven't started this process yet of basically planetary meditations
Mhm.
and how that can essentially, to some degree or another, liberate you from your personal astrology in some
Mhm.
respects, and how valuable that is because there's a lot of strings that are pulling on you that are driving decision making and things like that are actually like, I mean, I talk to my clients about this too. I'm like, look, your choices are leading to the situation you're currently enjoying largely, and there's ways of improving your decision making ability, and one of those things is identifying the influences in your life.
Right.
And I think even at a very basic level, like learning how to build the ball and paw breathe and feel energy and just start tuning in those senses, I mean, that just, you don't have to take it that far, but you just having access to that sort of like data
Mhm.
input device is, you'll just start, I'm not sure about that now, and I think too that bad things, that if it's easier to do the things that aren't the right thing, like you're not like
Sure.
dragged along by these impulses and you're able to just go, I switch that off. Like I think that's why that 3 transformations exercise has been so great, because you just basically sit in the mental body and listen to your astral body having a hissy fit and going, okay, yeah, all right. Like it's like a brat,
Yes.
And
Right.
I've heard the conversation, right? People,
Right.
if I talk about anyone, they'll probably think I'm nuts, but I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. These things need to be schooled and matured and these types of things, right?
Right. Well, it's like your body. Okay. The body itself has a primitive kind of intelligence associated with it, separate from your astral, separate from your mental, and all the rest of that stuff. But it's like a really dumb computer. Okay. It's going to keep running this routine until something just breaks. So, one of my favorite things to discuss along these lines is pain relief. Okay. Not talking from drugs, because drugs mask your conscious awareness and sensory apparatus to the pain. But an interesting phenomenon that's well known in chiropractic circles, bone setting circles, is you get a patient in, been in pain for a long time. Okay. Years sometimes. Okay. You do an adjustment, and they'll tell them, listen, the first couple of adjustments don't drive home. Get someone to take you home. Why? Okay. And I experienced this myself many years ago. Because if you make the pain go away all of a sudden, okay, and really make the cause of that stop, all right, I'm not going to get into the virtues of chiropractic theory here, but let's just say the guy does the adjustment correctly. This pain in your hip or your back that's been there for a decade just pop goes away. The body gets very confused by this because the body's going, hey, I'm supposed to be in pain. I'm supposed to be in pain. I've been in pain forever. I'm supposed to be in pain. Now, all of a sudden, you're not. You know what usually happens? They pass out because the body's confused. He goes, all right, I know what's going on. I'm going to hit the big reset button. And when I wake up, everything's going to make sense again. So, okay, I was a young man, was jumping out of airplanes, hurt my back. This happens, jumping out of airplanes. They say only 2 things fall out of the sky: bird shit and retards. So, clearly I was one of the retards. All right. So, I was in pain for a good year and a half. Didn't believe in chiropractic. My family was totally opposed to it. But finally, at a certain point, I'm just like, dude, These guys want back surgery. I'm 26 years old. I'm not doing this. Let's find something. So I finally go into this chiropractic clinic. Chiropractor told me, they said, don't drive home. Okay. First session, didn't really notice much. I guess he didn't get it or whatever. Second session, though, I kept passing out in my car as I was driving on my way home. Luckily, didn't get in a wreck. Nobody died. Okay. So I fall asleep and snap out of it. Got home, laid down in my bed. I was out for 8 hours. Just passed out.
Wow.
Because my body was going, all right, something changed. We don't know why it changed, but it did. Hit the big reset button. Everything was fine. So that's where the body can get you in a lot of trouble. But again, this kind of programming in the body is important. That's why we breathe. It's why we eat, why we have all these automatic behaviors that in the face of danger or threats or fear or whatever allow you to react your way through a problem. And without those, we probably wouldn't survive. So, but it's part of the mechanism. Again, magic, meditation, yoga, Reiki, all this other stuff gives us some tools that allow us to engage with this with a little more granularity. But as one of my teachers once said, you can't beat the monkey and the monkey is you. Your body gets the final vote. And if there's something wrong with it or you're not dealing with problems, performance is going to be subpar. I mean, Joe Rogan said it best. You meet a guy who's 50 pounds overweight, 6 months go by, you meet him again, he's lost 50 pounds, so it's like 22 kilos. That's a different guy. His endocrine system works differently. His attitude towards life works differently. Dopamine levels, all that stuff change. It's still the same physical body. It's the same spirit inhabiting that body. But his perception of reality, how he behaves, what he does, what he's capable of doing are all radically different. And I'm sure you've seen this a lot with people who have drug addiction problems and all the rest of that. The ones of whom who actually kick it and stay away, they may be haunted by that experience for the rest of their days, but they're different people afterwards. And that's where this process of what they call ennoblement comes into play. People have this vision of the great master who's very kind and compassionate and blah, 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 blah. Okay, fine. All right. Well, what most people don't know is that behavior comes about over time as people become more and more energetically sensitive. The negative feedback you get from acting like a jackass just becomes too uncomfortable, so you stop doing it. Now, if you're the person on the receiving end of this, you don't care. All of a sudden, your husband treats you well, takes care of the kids, pays the bills on time. Okay, he's kind of boring every time he knocks off work and is done taking care of families in that extra room in the house, chanting or doing something weird. But you don't care because he went from being an abusive alcoholic to somebody who treats you really, really well. But it's not because he wants to treat other people well. It's because the negative feedback he gets from treating people poorly is too much. So I had a student, shall remain nameless, who had a marijuana, alcohol, tobacco, food, and prostitution addiction.
Man, the big five.
I mean, man, he was hitting on all cylinders, right? I mean, just good banging. Okay. Got fired from a series of jobs because he just came across as a weirdo. Brilliant guy. All right. Super smart, super focused. But the vibe he carried around him was one of drug and sex addict, right? So no matter how good he was at the work, nobody wanted to be around this guy. Fast forward several years, all that's gone. You wouldn't recognize him going down the street. Super fit, kind of people in foreign countries where people just walk up to him and are like, hey, can I take a picture with you? You just come across as such a nice person. Now he has done a ton of work. I mean, a lot. Okay. And it didn't happen quickly. It happened slowly over time. But it's interesting that people, again, are capable of these things. But free will being in such limited quantity in practice, it doesn't happen very often, which is sad. But yeah, man, if people plug away long enough, they change their behavior. Even if most people wouldn't be happy with the ultimate source of that motivation.
Yeah, I hear. I mean, look, hey, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had everything, if we didn't need anything, you know? I've just found the value of, you know, things like community and sitting in the
Mm,
forest. Like once I sit, I tell you what, man, like I live in a pretty nice little area, you know, lots of trees and that, and there's a
sure.
few nice places to go and sit, but there's a self-correcting nature to the vital force that
Mhm.
just kind of gets you on board with that's what I've discovered anyway, that gets you back on track to evolution. And these
Sure.
old things just tend to fall away. Now, if you get like for me, like when I learned the build the ball thing years ago because everyone does that, but
Of
it's
course.
when you take it when you take it further and you start paw breathing it and working with it and playing with it more, like you go, this is a curiosity. You keep playing with it, and you start changing as you start
Mhm.
embodying it more. And like you said, you become sensitive to things so that it's just too hard to be an a-hole. Like it's just not a good time anymore, right? It's like, oh God, you can. And when you're talking to someone, there's part of you that wants to sort of like maybe go down that track a bit, and you're like going, oh, I can just starting to
Oh, yeah.
feel it leaking, man. You know, and I'm like, oh no, no, you know what? I'm just going to go back, and I can understand why people in these practices are very uh, eloquent and careful in choosing their words and things like this too, because I don't know, I can get caught up in conversations like the old Phil. Like I've made big strides. I used to be quite a bold, arrogant, cocky person. I was still a good person at the core of it, but
Sure.
you know, as a muso up on stage and getting drunk and wasted, trying to get laid and like all that sort of stuff, right?
Why
And
not?
then
No, sure.
yeah, hey, I tell you what, it was a lot of fun. I got to say, my ears are still pretty smashed, but so it took a toll, and so you know that kind of brash bravado of all those years, it took a while to wear it off. But now, like when I wanted to become sensitive, I didn't realize that it was a double-edged sword, and that it comes with like, yeah, you can have the thing, but being a dick is you're not going to enjoy it, and you're going to learn it the hard way. And I did, and that's fine, you know.
And that's where the myth of the black magician requires a little bit of elaboration. Do not get me wrong. These techniques we engage in, 3-point concentration, can be amazingly potent over time, even if you have no sensitivity of any kind. The trick is, if a guy has no sensitivity, getting him to do this stuff over time is really hard. But if you just use active visualization, 3-point concentration, it's going to work. Those guys tend to be the most dangerous because they can have a lot of raw power and they don't care what happens to other people because they're not getting the feedback.
Good
But
point.
there's a
Yeah.
catch. There's no finesse to what they're doing, so they're relatively easy to sidestep. Because without that sensitivity, you never develop a real understanding of what you're doing or how to work with it. So ritual work can kind of throw a curveball into this because if you have a bunch of people who are working some ritual in groups, um, they can pull off some things that are relatively unpleasant, even if they have no idea of the bill they're signing up for later on, or even cognizant of the things that are happening in their own backgrounds. But again, they will lack finesse in what they're doing. I'm throwing this out there because I get this question all the time. Well, why can't I work a ritual to change the behavior of, some politician or religious figure or whatever? Well, it goes back to the egregore. If you have millions of people worshiping someone or giving that person their energy, even as a linked circle of 13, you're not going to you're not going to hit that. That wall is too thick.
Mm.
So there was a famous Maharishi who, let's say it was Detroit, went to Detroit and had his followers wish to decrease the violence in the city. And so they meditated every day, like 50,000 of these people every day for a month straight. And sure enough, during that month, the rate of violence got cut in half. Bravo. But it was just cut in half because there are millions of people living in Detroit or Chicago or whatever it was, and 50,000 people working from the outside.
Mm.
And 6 weeks after they finished doing this, everything went back to normal.
Mm.
So scale also has a big effect on what we're able to pull off. And this is where there's this kind of weird argument between internal power practitioners and the ritual guys. Okay. As an individual, no matter how strong and potent, and again, I hate the term masterful, I've become, a linked circle of 13 or 20 guys are going to swamp me, even if only one guy in that group of 20 knows what he's doing, and the other 19 are just along for the ride.
Mm.
Because that's the potency of group work. And kind of like what you pointed out regarding community. Listen, as esoteric practitioners, magicians, 90% of the developmental work you have to do on your own. But there's real value in getting initiations, being shown how to do things in groups, because that group energy is going to allow something to manifest that as an individual we usually can't pull off. So again, I favor Kabbalah. Why do I teach a Kabbalah class every weekend, even though it leaves me completely wasted afterwards for a good day? Because that group working generates the letters at a strong enough energy level that everybody in the group gets it.
Mm.
And they might not be able to repeat it when they go home, okay? But if they keep trying because they've already had the experience, sooner or later everything kicks in and works. Go team. That's that ritual versus individual or internal power thing. Again, as an internal power practitioner, there's a lot of things I can just do on the fly, which is awesome, but I'm one guy.
Mm.
The ritual guys, there's the wind up in the pitch, so to speak, right?
Yep.
But because there's more of them focused on a common goal, and oh, by the way, they got that Egregore and its battery kicking, and they got all the initiations and blah, 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 blah. They can generally generate some pretty potent stuff, even if it takes them a while, even if there's not much finesse, and even if they're very limited in what they're addressing. So the better systems, quite frankly, are usually a mixture of both. But most systems per se tend to track heavily upon either the internal power aspect or the ritual aspect.
So if I might just jump in for a second, just ask that, like you said, I mean, to me, logically, I would assume that the best way to go, the best, if that's a word, would be, essentially a independent, IPS practitioners coming together and being, independent of, seeking to be independent from influences and things like that. I mean, that for me would seem, personally, I've got to say, like, I'm okay with not being associated with Reiki because I want to be able to be dropped on a desert island and not need anything, and I have to say, the discovering this Baden work, and especially the Kabbalah stuff, like the Kabbalah stuff, man, when I even think about it, I get up here. I love granularity. I love specificity. I was a parts guy dealing with minor little components. I like to know how things go together. And this is sort of helping me break it down and make sense of it, because I've been in the flowery language circles where people are using stuff that I just don't understand no matter how much reading I do. But when you have personal direct experience, and then you're able to sort of pull it apart and sort of come to know it over time. And so when you're doing group sessions on the weekends, good brother, people are getting a really good chance to soak and become familiar with it.
Right.
In Reiki in the old days, you would go to the dojo 2 or 3 times a week to sit with the teacher. You wouldn't just go to a weekend workshop, get one, and then that's, all done, and I think that might be, I think the future of things as far as esoterics, like in a real evolutionary sense goes. It's like going, well, because like you said, I can't remember if you said this, but a large majority of what I've come across in my time exploring Esoterica is that it's largely ritual based stuff.
Yeah.
And so they're looking to connect. They want to get some special connect with an angel or with a person, whatever, and go, I'm a representative or something. That's like going, well, you do realize that these things are essentially using you in a lot of cases as a medium of expression, because they haven't got a physical body.
Absolutely. And keep in mind, this is not a bad thing. Okay.
No.
It's ritual has so many adherents because it's time efficient. Listen, I love the internal power approach. I've been doing this for 30 plus years at this point. Fine. But I had one student who came to me who wasn't particularly gifted, but very driven. Really wanted to get this stuff. Spent months studying with my teacher, Mark Rasmus, in the mountains. I walked him all the way through Kabbalah. He was getting a little bit, but not a whole lot. Didn't have adequate body training. Hadn't figured out the importance of that. We had a series of conversations. He took off. He went to Africa. He went to Tanzania. He hired groups of Maasai warriors 5 at a time to practice rebounding with him 5 hours a day while running the Kabbalistic letters.
Wow.
90 days later, he'd put on over 15 kilograms of body mass. He was hypersensitive energetically because the tissue had now been built and integrated into him. And he called to apologize to me and said, "Hey, I'm sorry. I thought you were making things up. I just couldn't tell." Internal power is great. How many people do you know have both the time and the money and the commitment to go do that for 90 days? And by the way, he did 3 cycles of this. I think he took it a little too far. I think he got 90% of what he got after the first 90 days. But the point is, that's a huge commitment of time that goes into internal power practice and development. So if you don't have a reason to do that, or you've got more pressing concerns like, okay, I'm a medieval age senior peasant who, has access to land and a little bit of money, and the local nobleman keeps coming by raping my daughter every Thursday because, hey, he gets to do that. There are no cops. There's no courts that are going to pay attention to me. If I try to duke it out with this guy, they're just going to slaughter my whole family. So what do? Hey, you go to the local shaman village sorcerer dude. You get a sigil. Shaman's like, all right, I can't have this coming back to me. So here's your sigil. Here's the ritual. Have at it. And 60 days later, the nobleman falls off his horse and breaks his leg and stops coming around. Okay. That's a good use of your time. You got the answer. You got the result you needed, right? Great. That's the reason why real professionals, this stuff, pretty uncommon. I mean, even when I deal with the Tibetans, who are a very different group of people under the hood than they are on the surface, they're very direct. They're like, listen, we've got yogis and we've got monks, and the yogis are better. Why? Yogis sit around practicing all the time. They're not out preaching to the lay people. They're not out handling some guy's funeral or helping some kid with his grades or, teaching the liturgy. They're just practicing all the time. Now, if they're not rich to begin with, they tend to be rather poor, which sucks on a variety of levels. But again, if that's what you're devoting all your time to, well, that's what you're going to be good at. And most people don't have the time for that. They work in a bank, they're a baker, they fix cars, whatever. 4 hours a day of practice. You got a family? You're running a business? You got a real job? Get out of here. It's not going to happen. But you still got problems. Well, a little bit of Reiki, a little bit of ritual work, a few ceremonies here. Makes your life better. All right, maybe it's worth a rub. Maybe not. You'll find out. When I started working with Kabbalah openly, my teacher, Mark Rasmus, told me he thought there were about 300 to 400 people worldwide using that method. And over the years, I've been contacted by a variety of people, completely outside Barden's system, by the way, who were like, hey, I'm from India, I'm from the Middle East, I'm from wherever. This is what we do. How did you figure this out? And it's always a very interesting conversation. A lot of times they can't go too deep into that conversation with me. I'm not part of their system or whatever it is. But my feeling is really hardcore practitioners who finished the equivalent of Barden's 3 books. Phil, there might be a couple thousand of those guys worldwide, probably less. You're more apt to run into a billionaire than you are somebody who did this work. Listen, the reason is simple. You have to have a certain amount of wealth or an ability to live in extreme poverty to have the time necessary to do this. You have to have a body that's going to let you get away with it. You have to have a reason, which is probably the most important part. And quite frankly, you need to have an IQ of at least 120 or higher, preferably 130. Because apparently 3-part concentration while, doing all this other stuff, not something someone who isn't really smart to begin with can pull off. I don't know why, but it seems to be the way it works out. So if you're living in the modern world and you're that smart and you have the resources and you have the time, you can do anything. Go be a neurosurgeon, go be a rocket scientist, go be, an Elon Musk wannabe in the San Francisco Bay Area, balling out with, millions of dollars of IP money and Ferraris and questionable women. Why not? Right? Society is going to reward you for any of these things far more directly than, all right, man, I got to work on letter G tonight. Let's get this on. So yeah, it's magicians with a comprehensive toolkit, internal power, uncommon, super uncommon. Now that said, they tend to pop up in some interesting areas. One Isaac Newton would be an example of that. Pythagoras. These are men and women of renown. Maria the Jew, who was one of the founders of alchemy in ancient Egypt. These were remarkable people. But even in societies that have a very open tolerance to this kind of thing, not very common. Super, super, super uncommon. So, yeah, food for thought.
You're right. Like we've only got so many hours and days up our sleeves in this incarnation. And, for those of us who are able to sort of like have continuity of awareness when we pass into the next life, somebody mentioned that. I mean, that'll be a bit of a prize to have, not have to start again. But, if we just pull it right back and go, okay, well, I've got, what am I? I'm 46. I've got maybe another good 50 years. I live pretty well. And I have to say, the more I do my Qigong and explore these things well, people just go, how old are you again, bro? Like, I'm young, man. I'm young compared to my friends. They're all looking pretty old.
Sure.
But that's just how it is, right? So